You know what's most tragic about global conflicts? People get in their feelings and forget that human suffering is our common condition and immediately reduce the sorrow and struggle of people living in areas consumed by war to talking points. We join in on online debates full of hate speech and pick sides without any regard for the humanity tossed about in the conflict. Many Westerners didn't follow the Ukrainian struggle with Russia from its initiation in 2014. We didn't pine over political agendas until our medias aired the Pretty Little Body somewhere around 2021. Fun filters of flags were flung over profile pictures, and we came up with all sorts of twisted ideas about who's woke without showing a shred of empathy for the victims. It's some sort of morbid curiosity lurking within our subconscious that doesn't get interested until the death count reaches tragic numbers. We're so numb to the endless cycle of violence we inflict on each other, it takes something truly ugly to make us turn our attention towards brutality. But even then, it's the same sort of attention people give when they're passing by accidents on the freeway, right? Are they looking to make sure everyone's okay? Do they want to see blood staining the pavement? Now we see what's unfolding in the Middle East and have all but forgotten about Joseph Kony and some 66,000 boy soldiers who displaced close to 2 million people in Uganda. The 300,000 deaths in Darfur became obscure memories as we shift our attention to how the Israeli government is implementing its response to Hamas. How many lives will it cost before we pause and think, what if that was me? How would I want to be treated in the wake of a tragedy? Why do we doom scroll and throw around narratives while citizens continue to suffer? Why do we attack grieving mothers preparing to bury their kids? They're just Palestinian extremists, right? Or colonizers don't have the right to mourn their losses when they're living on stolen land. All this Western projection, right? When will we say enough is enough and choose love? What up, though? It's Justin in Mystical Mind State. I wanted to touch base with everyone swept up in the fervor of rightness since 8,000 plus Israelis and Palestinians lost their lives in a firestorm of ballistics starting on October 7th. Forgive me for letting a bit of time pass before I address this, but I can't stress how difficult it's been for someone who's spiritually Jewish to digest a conflict so deeply connected with my identity. My choice to lead with the message to members of the faith with the Kabbalistic concept of Tikkun Olam was intentional. However, I had to do the practice recommended and center myself before delivering a more in-depth look at the senseless loss of life. In part, because I needed to recognize how my own cultural identity shapes my worldview, but I also needed to move through this and get into a space where I can relate to the anguish on all sides. It's easy to say that Jewish people need to pray the Shema while focusing on the self, on our kinsmen, and then on a citizen of Gaza. But no spiritual person can, nor should they, ask others to start a spiritual practice they themselves aren't actively doing. So I silently sang the Nagun through work and exercise. I hummed the Nagun on my rides around town and laid down with the Nagun dancing around in my head. I cried for a week and opened a dialogue with several mutuals who were Sufis, all the while praying the Shema in this fourfold pattern. Here we are a couple of weeks later, and I can finally say with confidence, I want this loss of human life to end. Not just for the members of my own community, but for the Palestinians forced between a rock and a hard place. Waves of anger came over me, seeing people praising Israelis fleeing across the desert as the rave for peace became a symbol of terrorism and rage. Western anti-Semitism gave the Ashkenazi a facelift, making them colonizing white supremacists in an instant. Now, while that was happening, I was aware of just how far right Netanyahu's administration is, and I was instantly afraid for the women and children in Gaza who were completely innocent. Yes, I'm aware of the percentage of those who support Hamas, but that doesn't change the fact that not everyone does. Everyone with friends in Israel knew Netanyahu would quickly take action and relentlessly hit friend and foe alike with his own missiles. Egyptians restricting the influx of fleeing residents broke my heart to see. Meanwhile, my Instagram feeds and Tumblr threads became this anti-Semitic hotbed, where Jewish people mourning their dead were met with free Palestine rhetorics, flag emojis completely overshadowing all of their pain and telling them Look, these are the statistics of the people that have died since Israel became a state in 1948. No well wishes or compassion, just instant resentment and disgust at Israeli citizens grieving over kidnapped friends and relatives killed in the attacks. There has been a crazy amount of anxiety sweeping through the Jewish community in the diaspora, who are once again reminded of why our suffering is self inflicted or well deserved or a natural reaction to colonialism and apartheid policies. These woke warriors learned all about the struggle from brushing through a few Google searches and regurgitated dozens of lines we've heard from radical Islam and Nazis alike for decades. People speak to us like 1,400 years of Muslim control in the region was the complete opposite of Palestine's conditions today, and it was a great time for the Jewish people. Like we don't know what the Dimitude looked like for our ancestors. While Muhammad saw his mission as an extension of Jewish and Christian traditions, his predecessor, Caliph Omar, decreed Jews and Christians should be removed from Arabia. Thus, the separation of Muslim and Jew began. The children of the book would become dhimmi, who weren't allowed to own horses and had to dismount their donkeys when a Muslim crossed their path to show they understood how inferior their Jewish identity was to a true believer. Meanwhile, Americans are screaming about our ideas and our beliefs. Lines between European, Ashkenazi, and Mizrahi are blurred by Americans looking through a political lens of racial tensions here in the United States. They immediately raided Jewish spaces online and blindly blamed us with no understanding of how complicated the history between Arabs and Jews are. It's been really disturbing to see just how little these highly educated people know about a region that so many Westerners trace their spiritual beliefs back to. Yes, the state of Israel has a disproportionate advantage over Gazans and are currently responding in the most tragic ways possible. Yes, it's really bad the Israeli government is turning entire strips of apartments and shopping centers into rubble in response to terrorism. Yes, it's always a mistake to allow tragedy to give us an excuse to give in to the worst of us. Yes, there are absolutely huge groups of people who have no allegiance to Hamas getting caught in the crossfire. No one disputes this. Meanwhile, any steps taken towards a lasting peace promised in the Abraham Accords is being diverted down a rocky road by Islamic extremists and Likud nationalists. Sadly, these are the two ruling powers in the region. Neither side is willing to bend and are guiding the people with nothing but bitterness in their hearts for the other side. Both parties are so busy with slandering one another and garnering support for their movements that they have forgotten that men, women, and children are living with the continued threat of violence every single day. People whose anxiety will undoubtedly lead to an entirely new generation of children who share their political disposition because they remember when the bombings were sent for them. Yonatan Netanyahu was killed in action after Palestinian and German militants hijacked a plane full of Israeli citizens. His brother Benjamin, in his grief, allowed it to become the reason he became a politician with such a hardline stance against terrorism. This is the sort of short-sightedness that forgets that every missile launched into Gaza Strip potentially gives Palestinian children the heartbreak needed to become the next Ayman Nofal. How quickly history forgets one of the largest resistance movements against British Palestine was a Jewish militia called Haganah. Moreover, Muhammad al-Husseini saw the Jews returning to the land to be in line with the teachings of Islam, as Muslims don't have any sacerdotal attachment to Jerusalem as a territorial claim. Since the days of Yitzhak and Ishmael, the tensions have been passed down through the lines of trauma, and conflicts have really been forgotten at this point. Then there's the shared experience where both Arab and Jew endured crusades as waves of Christians joined in on the fight over religious sites in Jerusalem. You see what I'm getting at here? When Solomon's temple is associated with the last place the Prophet Muhammad visited before ascending to heaven, there are lots of factors involved. We're talking centuries of drama with atrocities that have occurred since then on both sides. There is a lot of complicated history, and it must be addressed and it must be discussed. The two-state solution seems like it's the most sensible outcome for all parties involved. Palestinian people with deep roots to the land should not be fenced in and restricted in areas like they are today. At the same time, the Mizrahi Jews who have never left their ancestral home shouldn't be forced to leave or be eradicated like Hamas is advocating for. So long as the dominant parties are nursing old war wounds and digging through history books, gathering talking points, the outlook for that two-party state does not look good. What should be understood the most by those of us outside of the conflict is this. If Yitzhak and Ishmael are historical characters, the Israelis and Palestinians are family. What could possibly be the best outcome for all of this? An end to the sibling rivalry and a uniting of these two spiritual bodies living harmoniously together. Everyone in the world would be amazed to see this union become a reality. How many people who fled religion will come to grips with their own spiritual conflicts and spiritual traumas just by watching it? Hashem and Allah are cultural names given to the same and infinite unknowable one beyond all there is. As we say in Judaism, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. As our Sufi brothers say, Wadat ul Wujud, unity of being. Each of these reflections essentially state that the only truth within the universe is God, and that all things exist within God. God is a union. To be a reflection of divine union, we as a people must become a union. One more time. You want to know what's most tragic about global conflicts? People forget we are one species and are in desperate need of healing globally. Peace. Oh, Shlamalak, my friend. Av Shukran.